The vein in the temple pulses, a precise measured step, like a bassist setting the skeletal rhythm of the entire composition. This is how the digital heart of a text editor beats. For decades now, a seemingly trivial thing that you don't pay attention to, but it turns out to be very important and useful in daily work. For 55 years, the cursor has been blinking on computer screens while journalists write texts or programmers code in the Google search bar, and chat messenger continuously blinking, asking the question, "What's next?" The blinking cursor is much older than most of those watching this video. Its appearance is largely related to publishing activities rather than personal computers. In the first half of the last century, a text could be handled either with writing tools or with a typewriter. In both the first and second scenarios, it would have taken 100 times, no less, to rewrite, correct, and reprint the text so that it could then be multiplied for the reading audience. Mass printing was a lengthy, complex, and expensive process, and it hadn't changed much since the invention of the linotype at the end of the 19th century. On the typewriters, the typist was typing lines of text. Using clever mechanisms, they were assembled from individual metallic and embossed letter matrices. As a result, the metal lines were right in front of the typist, who could literally use their hands to correct errors in the set, retrieve letters, and rearrange them. These lines then served as a mold for casting linotype lines, from which paragraphs, articles, headlines, and pages of a future, for example, newspaper, were manually assembled. In the 1950s, the first desktop publishing systems with phototype settings started to appear. They had glass or film discs or strips that moved in front of a light source and exposed selected characters onto photosensitive paper. With the development of technology in the 60s, these systems learned to work together with computers, at first even without a display. One of the early systems, made by the company Fairchild Semiconductor, worked in a truly remarkable way. The typist would type a line of text on the keyboard, but he couldn't check for errors in the typing because the system didn't have a display. So the line had to be typed again. If the contents of the entered line matched the first time, a bell rang, and a perforated tape came out of the machine corresponding to the typed text. You have to agree, not the most intuitive and sophisticated method of work. There was simply no way to correct an error. If there was no call, the line had to be retyped. After finishing typesetting a block of lines, the typesetter had to insert paper tapes into the phototypesetting device, where the magic of exposure happened. Either small parts of the future page or its entire film negatives were created. Plates for mass printing were already being made from them. At that time in the 60s, computer terminals of similar publishing systems received incredible small screens on a cathode ray tube, where tons of text were output. No mice, no trackpads, no blinking cursors. In these endless walls of text, it was easy to get lost. In this video dedicated to the transition of the New York Times newspaper in 1978 to a new layout and printing system, you can observe how typesetters work with an electronic system without a blinking cursor. A rectangular area of light surrounds. This is straightforward letter, which is currently being edited. Advanced technologies have significantly simplified and accelerated the process of mass printing. However, they have lost a rather important function, or an intuitively understandable way of inserting and deleting text. There is something artisanal about moving metal sign reliefs by hand, rearranging them. A little break to thank the guys and girls from Patreon who supports me there. Without these people, this episode probably wouldn't exist. Thank you very much. Keep up the good work. These guys are all marks over here. Yo, thank you. I remember him explaining to me the reason for the blinking cursor, and it was simple. He said that there was nothing on the screen that could help you understand where the cursor is. So he wrote code for it to know where he will be ready to print on an electronic beam tube. This was written in 2014, shortly after the death of Charles Kiesling by a man who introduced himself as his son. Charles Kiesling worked in the 1960s at the American corporation Sperry Rand, which was engaged in the production of military equipment and electronics, industrial and consumer products. In his youth, he served in the United States Navy, participated in the Korean War, and after the military decided to dedicate himself to the rapidly developing field of computing electronics. Worked with other engineers on the development of logical computer circuits. One such design is described in a patent application from 1967 and is called blinking cursor for CRT display. This was a time when computers were becoming powerful enough that developers could finally think about making them user-friendly. A marker that would indicate where a user-entered character would appear was at the forefront of similar usability desires. Of course, cursors existed before Kiesling's invention. Their shape varied, horizontal or vertical line, a combination of them, or a bright spot above the letter. But these were imperfect cursors. The cursor in the currently available systems performs its function unsatisfactorily, for which it was intended. Each time the cursor is over a symbol already drawn on the screen, it becomes difficult to find. The more symbols on the screen, the harder it is to find the cursor. This is how Kiesling wrote about the imperfections of cursors of his era and adds that means are needed to emphasize the cursor position. Kiesling came up with the idea to alternately display the cursor and the symbol it is on the screen. Since the screen was refreshed at a frequency of 60 Hz, the cursor had to be drawn 30 times per second and the entered character had to be drawn 30 times. As a result, the blinking had to be slowed down to an acceptable speed for the human eye. Actually, this must have become one of Kiesling's most interesting inventions that went beyond Sperry-Rand. He worked in the corporation until the year 1994 and his retirement. He died more than 10 years ago. It is believed that the blinking cursor functionality was first introduced to the general public by Apple in its computer. This refers to the Apple II computer from 1977. As Kiesling's son claims his father was dissatisfied. But he worked at Sperry-Rand and corporate lawyers were already involved in a legal patent dispute. How it all ended, hardly anyone knows exactly. However, in the same Apple II, as acknowledged by the company's engineers, the blinking cursor was an important part of the computer. The company even refused to support lowercase letters, which was surprising for the community, just to free up computing power for the blinking cursor. It is claimed that the inspiration for it was definitely not drawn from Kiesling's patent. Andy Hertzfeld, one of the former engineers of Apple at the dawn of the company's formation, claimed, who saw blinking cursors back in the early 1970s on video terminals when he was a student. For example, the horizontal blinking cursor was noticed on the DEC VT05, a standalone computer terminal with CRT monitors. In any case, one cannot deny the likelihood that at the dawn of the computer age, similar ideas were born in the minds of remarkable people. A lot of good and quality design in the field of human-computer interaction goes unnoticed until you look closely and scratch beneath the surface. An interface that allows for effective work should not be noticeable and should not distract the user's attention, should allow focusing on work. And while the history of the blinking cursor is not comparable in its impact to the invention of transistors, there is still a certain charm in such a small piece of the big digital world. Am I just crazy for paying him so much attention? And you're no less crazy if you watch this video to the end. We need to stick together. I suggest subscribing to the channel because there's a lot more interesting stuff ahead. Talk to you soon.